Right. Itisha, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you, Arsha. So for me, feminist choices are, see, I think the moment we start, so one of the biggest problem with languages is that it tries to capture an experience, and that is one of the strengths and limitations of trying to put our experiences into words. So the moment I say feminist choices, the question comes up, okay, what is a non-feminist choice then? Is this non-feminist? Is this feminist? And I think Rohitha has really highlighted, beautifully covered major points. For me, I think I simply see feminism as a movement against oppression of any kind. So we live in a world, and we've always lived in a world where there are, the power is stacked against certain groups of people and in favor of certain groups of people. So power hierarchies have always existed, whether it is gender hierarchy, sexuality, caste, class, color, ethnicity. No, we've always had a world which, um, there have been oppressors and there have been people who've been oppressed. So for me, feminism is a fight against any and all kinds of oppressions. And whenever I make a choice, so for me, to simplify it, is that whenever I make a choice to resist that oppression, to say no, it could be if I'm living in a family where I have been conditioned time and again and shamed for showing my body parts, shamed for wearing certain kinds of clothes, they're too short for you, character, shame. So there has been a lot of pressure to dress up a particular way. So in that way, if I am making the choice to, at the cost of pissing off and sometimes even facing the ire and aggression of my family members, to say that this is how I assert my resistance to your influence, undue influence on my selfhood. So that for me becomes a feminist choice in that context. So context is extremely important. Anytime you're swimming against the tide and making a choice to do that, which is extremely difficult, it's a feminist choice. So no choice in its absolute sense can be seen as feminist or non-feminist. For example, in India, women fighting for the right to wear burqa is a feminist choice because they are asserting their right to clothe the way they want to against a system who's denying them education if they dress up a certain way. Similarly, in case of women who are in Iran, they're asserting their rights against a system that is punishing them for not covering up, that is punishing them for keeping their hair a certain way or dressing up a certain way. They're asserting their rights to not wear the burqa. And both of these are feminist choices for me because they're going against a very powerful system. So same thing, bra burning is feminism, and wearing a bra for a transgender woman is feminism. That's what, for me, feminist choices means.
Thank you for sharing that. Soumya, would you like to go next? So, yes, Soumya.
Thank you, Arshia. I completely resonate with Rohitha and Dr. Itisha. And ideally, a feminist choice will be something, is basically a choice which is devoid of any external pressures, right? Something which I am completely taking, a decision that I'm taking completely on my behalf without facing any external pressures. But realistically, we are surrounded, like how Rohita said, we are not taking these decisions in a vacuum. So the decisions that we make, they come with a certain weight. There is a socio-cultural, a historical context to the decisions, the choices that we make, right? So I also am of the belief that no choice that we make can be completely feminist, but at the same time, we cannot call them non-feminist either. For example, like Dr. Itisha said that, an act of resistance against the systemic oppression against us, be it, micro level oppression, like say in our family, even an act of resistance against that is an assertion of our choice, our feminist choice. But we need to understand that this act of, exercising our agency is also comes with, social, caste and class privilege. For example, maybe I or several people attending this session right now may have the, the autonomy to exercise that choice. But for a lot of people, a lot of women, maybe their survival is what matters the most at that point, and maybe exercising their choice at that point is not of that much importance. So at the same time, that is no ground for us to shame that person or call that person a non-feminist. So yeah, so for me also, I mean, I completely, like I said, I'm just resonating and taking forward what Rohitha and Dr. Itisha said here.
Thank you for sharing that, Soumya. I think so far we have discussed that the choice here, we have used examples where the choice has been to resist the systems of oppression in whatever way is possible given our context. But what then happens if we say the choice to, let's say, somebody who is traditionally not, but somebody who's beautiful looking by the standards of society, and then they decide to dress a certain way, and then they say it's my choice to dress a certain way. How do we then navigate, or what do we make of that choice? Because then the conversation then goes towards catering to the male gaze, these kind of narratives. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I think it was last month when we had Karwa Chauth, and whenever that day comes every year, the discussion really revolves around choice feminism and how a lot of people these days do participate or are big active part of this tradition. And they say that it's a choice. So then what do we make of those choices? Anyone can go, and then we can take it ahead. Itisha, would you like to go first, and then?
Okay, so very important question here is that, so whether it's Karwa Chauth, whether it's pandering to the male gaze, and these are the choices that are being made. I think let's start with this one very important thing that Soumya said, that which I also truly believe, that no matter what, I mean, not what, but, not no matter actually, but, when someone is making a choice at an individual level, our focus really should not be to shame that person or to cancel that person out or things like that. I think the focus really should be on systems, structure, and structures that enable someone to make choices for their flourishing, and structures that don't. So I'll start with that, because that's what my basic position is. I do not believe in shaming humans and individuals. That's not my approach. About this question that you asked about Karwa Chauth, all choices may not necessarily be feminist choices. So whether I am pandering to the male gaze or whether I'm pandering to the patriarchy, I do not think it can come without any sense of awareness of what I'm doing and it's not that if I make, if there are so many choices I make on an everyday basis. For example, how do I get dressed up for this talk? Do I put on makeup or not? Do I go for waxing or not? How's my haircut gonna be? Is it gonna be, how much cleavage do I need to show? What do I need? All of those are, ultimately me deciding something. And coming to that whenever I make a choice, it is either in the direction of, sorry, I'm getting very muddled up in my own thoughts because I have so many out there, that I was actually speaking about the responsibility that comes, the political responsibility of our choices. So when someone decides to celebrate Karwa Chauth, and I was talking about so many choices that I make on an everyday basis, I have to choose my battles. I will be extremely exhausted and fatigued if so there are many times that I have to make certain choices that are just for my mental peace in that moment. This is something that every person has to go through, that we are at conflict with people that we love and the values that we adhere to. So social justice is an important value for me. And if I have my father or my mother or my sibling or an uncle who are sexist, who are homophobic, who are transphobic, and we have them all around us. How do we navigate those spaces? Do I not laugh at their jokes? Do I not attend those gatherings? Do I attend but not laugh? Now, what are these negotiations that I'm making? How much of my effort, mental peace, all of these things, how much is that, how is that taking away from me? It's very difficult, and I understand that, and that's why I said that, at an individual level, perhaps shaming is not the answer. Having said that, there are ample people out there who use the tag of feminism without any political awareness of the implications of what they're saying, what they're doing. So, for example, there is no way one can say that, customs that have their history in oppression are my choice today as a feminist. That is confusing everyone out there about what feminism is. To simply put, if they, for example, women voting, and I am fighting for, let's say, women's right to vote, and then someone says it's my choice to not vote, and you need to accept that choice, and you cannot say that, you cannot judge me for what happens as a result of me making that choice. What happens as a result of you making that choice is that your choice affects my choice. It makes it even harder for me to fight for my my rights. So that's a very muddled up answer to the question that you asked.
Thank you. I think the whole point of this space is to just have those muddled up thoughts together and try and demuddle them together. Soumya, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I had a quick thought to add on to what Dr. Itisha said. So, like you mentioned that, it's important that we do not shame a person for their choices as long as it's not harming another person. But, one pitfall of choice, one of the major pitfalls of choice feminism is because it's so individualistic in its, in its essence itself. What happens is we forget to question the social structures around us which are leading to these choices. For example, if I am a woman who likes to wear makeup, who likes to present herself or present her femininity in a certain way, why am I doing that? Because the neoliberal structures around me is such that it tells me that you're supposed to look a certain way. For the longest while, we are only coming, or we are only now coming into the, discourse of how all skin types, or how it is so unfair, it is absolutely wrong to show dark skinned women as not beautiful. Because for the longest while, we were, this concept of fairness as beauty was pushed onto us by the structures around us. So we really forget to question the social structures around us, which tells us that, it's okay if you're a feminist, you can you can observe Karwa Chauth. It's completely fine if you're a feminist, you can wear sindu, there's no problem in that. But we're not questioning these structures. So the shift should be such that we also focus on why are people doing these things, or if there is a mass awakening which leads to people understanding that it is absolutely fine to show your body hair. Because now a lot of us are, I feel a lot of us now feel a lot more comfortable. At least personally, I feel if I don't go to the parlor and don't like thread my bushy eyebrows, I feel completely fine. I feel still comfortable in my element, and I feel it's personally a progress. This is as compared to the 5-6 years before, when I would rush to the parlor every 2 weeks because I did not want even one strand of hair out, like not, which is, not prim and proper. So I feel the questioning should be, and I think it's happening, it's very gradual change. It's not something as much as we want change to just happen like this. It's very gradual, it's very slow. I feel it's happening. And I feel the accountability should be shared by the people who are practicing these choices, as well as we should also radically keep questioning the structures around us. Yeah, that's very much.
Thank you for sharing that, Soumya. Rohitha, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, just jumping off that. I mean, Soumya and Itisha have basically covered a lot of what I wanted to say as well. But yeah, just to add to that, I think there's an important misconception maybe in the popular discourse around choice, which conflates choice with freedom and autonomy, right? When that's not necessarily the case. So in the Karwa Chauth example itself, um, every like a person is free to make the choice to observe Karwa Chauth, but that doesn't make it liberatory. It's not a marker of autonomy as such, because you're still operating within a patriarchal system and context. So then when we make choice the basis of our demands, like the be all and end all of our feminism, then we're still giving a lot of institutions like the patriarchy, the systems and institutions, the state, the patriarchy, capitalism, everything, to the power to decide what our options are. And so even in a lot of conversations that are happening right now, like where there's a lot of transphobia in feminism, there's a lot of the conversation about Islamophobia when it comes to debates around the hijab, reproductive rights, abortion, the way that people on the other side, so to speak, frame their point of view is that this is morally incorrect for our community. We do not approve of this. But then our counter to that is kind of like, we still believe in an individual's choice to live the way they want, irrespective of the community. But the problem is that then again, we're asking the system to give us those choices rather than changing the system itself. So that's, I think, where I'm coming from with this question. Like even when we look at fashion, for example, and climate change, the conversations around sustainable fashion and fast fashion and the problems with that, people make choices to buy sustainable clothing. But what that does is that it kind of keeps us off, like it lets us off the hook to not think about the garment worker in the global south who is producing these to fast fashion in a sweatshop, because then the onus to think about that is on somebody else. It's no longer on me if I buy sustainable clothing. So then is my choice really that feminist in the long run? Because then I stop seeing a point of commonality between me and the woman in the sweatshop. Whereas if you look at the system about like why fast fashion as an industry even exists and start to question that, then the kind of points of commonality emerge, and then we can kind of look at solidarities that we can form across a lot of social positions. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I think you also touched upon the autonomy of choices and how much are we free, or are the choices that we're making are necessarily our own. To that, I would also like to then ask, just what are your thoughts on how much autonomy do we have on our choices, regardless of what choice that is, whether it's quote unquote feminist or quote unquote unfeminist choice. Rohitha, you can share first and then we can go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I think it's pretty much the same as what I kind of covered a bit of this in my previous answer. But also if we had to look at a movement that doesn't center the question of choice, but looks at the system itself, one of my favorites to look at is the wages for housework movement that the feminist Silvia Federici had spearheaded in Italy and the UK and some time ago. And that kind of was a systemic critique. It said that under capitalism, women's work in the home is unpaid, because it reproduces the labor power of the man who goes out to work. So that's the foundation of capitalism. And that's why we kind of have this division of labor, and women's work and care work is so undervalued. So that foundation was in question in that movement. So it wasn't a question of, giving women the choice to demand wages for housework if they want. It's questioning the system itself. It's opposing the fact, it's saying that under capitalism, it's inevitable that women's work is going to be undervalued and unpaid. So what next? So it kind of questions the system in that sense, right? So I think this applies to a lot of conversations that we're having now as well, like even with the hijab conversations, for example. It always is very dependent on the context of the structure that one is living in, like Itisha had pointed out much earlier, right? So yeah, I think I'll just stop there.
Thank you. Soumya, Itisha, anyone?
Should I? Sure. Something that Rohitha said sort of, it reminded me of something else. So how we end up, questioning structures that, if women continue to do housework, because they continue to do housework, even in a capitalist system, it's going to be underpaid. It's not going to be paid or underpaid. So if you heard of the news in like down south in Kerala, the government is trying to pay women for their housework, but at the same time, it's quite funny because then you're reinforcing the structure of sort of relegating women to housework and sort of reinforcing the structure that men are supposed to go out and do the go out in the public. To answer your question, Ashia. Like I'm drawing a blank right now. May I take like a minute to sort of compose myself? Yeah. Yeah. Rohitha, Itisha, if you want to go instead, I'll probably talk after that.
Sure. So the question is, how much freedom do I have? I don't think anyone has been able to answer this question since time immemorial. In philosophy, the debate of free will and determinism has always been there. Are my choices free of any antecedent influences, or the other way around? Do I have no choice? Is freedom an illusion? Is the concept of entire freedom really an illusion? At the end of the day, we're really products of our environment, products of our conditioning, products of our biology, etc. And we can never really transcend that. So these are two extreme poles that we have. One that says that no, everything is on you. There are pros and cons of having this extreme position. And then nothing is on you. Everything is kismat. It's out. Everything is outside you. You have no control over what happens to you in your life. And this is the other end. So often in my classes, I take up the example of substance abuse, because in where mental disorders are concerned, one of the least conditions we least empathize with is alcoholism, alcohol addiction. And the answer always is they chose to get addicted. In the same way, someone doesn't choose to have schizophrenia. You don't choose to have schizophrenia, you choose to get addicted, and therefore this person deserves all the suffering or problems or issues, and basically they should be marginalized, and they're a burden on the society. And so when we think of this example and we take up the concept of choice, it's not why a person chooses to abuse alcohol is an extremely complex question. The kind of family that you came up from, the role models that you had, in fact, even biology, addiction is also related to your biology. And so if I believe in extreme position of determinism, then I would say that there are people who are bound to become alcoholics. There's no therapy needed, there's no work needed. There are some people who will become alcoholics as and when. No, we don't need to do any intervention as a society. I don't need to, for example, 15-year-old kids coming from abusive families, delinquent behaviors, exhibiting delinquent behavior, let them be, because determinism, there is no choice, that freedom that they have to choose. And if I believe completely in free will, I go blaming the victim. They chose up in, so the answer that I have is that, we need to take the position of determinism when it allows us to give compassion to a human being and understand their context that they're coming from. But I also need free will. I also need to believe that I have control in my life, and I'm not just a dead fish going with the flow. Jahan leke chali gayi duniya, that I will have no control. So essentially, this is an individual and system. Is system producing me and I have no control over my life? And history, there is ample evidence in history that's not the case. Individuals have made choices, or individual, and including the choices of challenging the system, that have changed the context. So this is what happens when I make a choice. It comes from a context and it gives back to a context. So if I'm making revolutionary choices, if I'm making a choice to the reason why most tyrants are so afraid of that one person who questions them is they know that this one person is going to mean 10 tomorrow, then 100 tomorrow, and they're threatened by that. So it's not, so we can't just say that one individual does not matter and one individual is all that matters. So this, but having said that, we do need to also look at structures again. So if we are looking for a comfortable answer in one word, this is what it is and this is what it is not, I think that is the one thing why perhaps many of us are, having this question debate over here, because we're just not we haven't trained our minds to be okay with complexity, to be okay with the fact that this is politics, this is how it is, this is how life is. We will not have neatly packed answers that will fit everyone. There will be compromises made, there will be friends lost, there will be communities gained, there will be things that we'll achieve, and there will be a lot of things that we'll have to make peace with and make do with. But that's what the entire journey is about, I guess.
Thank you for sharing that. Soumya, would you like to share anything at this point, or?
Yeah, I can. Thank you, Ashia, for giving me that space. So what I had in mind was I will probably use the example of sex work here to sort of explain how much does autonomy of an individual influence their choice. For example, when you look at sex work, one of the prominent arguments that come up is, sex work is also work. It's a matter of choice. But the truth is that the choices for a person involved in sex work is so narrowed down that sex work might seem as the better off option at that point. So is it, after all, an exercise of their agency, when they're choosing that as their mode of work? The exploitation that happens out of sex work, both at the hands of both from the hands of upper caste men and men of their own community, how can that make it valid as somebody's actual exercise of free will or free choice, right? So we need to understand how our autonomy is also determined a lot by I'm going back to something that I said at the onset, that it's determined a lot by the social caste privilege that we have. So today, maybe growing my body hair or not wearing lipstick is a matter of feminist choice for me, but at the same time, a woman who has to enter sex work, and for her it could be a matter of choice, but is it after all her choice because there are no other better off options left? So I personally believe that our autonomy is also determined by a lot of socio-cultural factors around us.
Thank you for using that example, Soumya. I think that really connects with the next question that I had is, I think we all sort of agree that choices are not made in a vacuum. They are born out of our context, our conditioning, and the way we choose to navigate the imperfect world that we live in, right? So then how do we as privileged feminists make peace with our choices that may not necessarily be quote unquote unfeminist? And yeah, anyone can go.
Arsha, would you like to elaborate on this question a bit?
So, okay. So, I, as a privileged person, if I choose to get married, I am also aware that I am making this choice, which is not necessarily a feminist choice. I am also aware that how that impacts other women who may not want to get married, but it also builds pressure on them. Like even a cousin of my own age who doesn't want to get married, but it builds an unspoken pressure on them to get married because I got married. So then how do I make peace with it as a feminist, as a privileged feminist who could have chosen to not get married, but I chose to get married? And how do I then make a peace with this quote unquote unfeminist choice, and how that has a rippling effect on people around me or just women in general?
Should I go first? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I think a very interesting example, because I think this thing that, sibling example, that what the sibling does has a lot of ripple effect on the younger ones, especially. उन्होंने तो ऐसा किया, तुम्हें क्या जरूरत है, तुम्हें क्यों पार्टी जानी, वो तो कभी पार्टी नहीं की, उसको तो कभी मोबाइल फोन की जरूरत नहीं थी, why do you need that? So that's a very, I would say, loaded question, much to reflect, much to think on. How do we through our actions, so you're actually asking me to balance my life and what makes my life comfortable, my choices, my actions, and the world out there that I'm contributing to, that I'm part of, people who look up to me. How do I do that? And that is something that I go through, not just as a feminist, but also as an educator. So the kind of opinions that I have, the things that I share, how I talk about, how I conduct myself, I'm a role model. So it's always there on my mind, ki how do I make it better, how do I, and especially the guilt is too intense if you fall short, that, oh, okay, so what, damned if you do, damned if you don't. So if I talk about, for example, oftentimes I teach in a women's college, and I'm very open about this, that, please finish your education, get a job. This is, people want to really simplify things. So I just give them this one thing: get a job before getting married. Very simply, be financially independent when you get married. But then we'll have questions like, are you shaming girls in your class who are getting married? Are you not supporting the girls who are pressurized into getting married? And it's quite it's not easy, balancing all the sides, like being on your toes all the time, or getting the nuances correct, explaining. There's so much of problems in, dialogues and misunderstandings, and there's very little patience to, in fact, even have these spaces that we're having right now to just listen to another human being. So for me, as a, your question, privileged feminist, and what my role is, first of all, my role as a privileged feminist is to definitely realize that that my choices are political at the end of the day, which is something that we have been discussing so far. And so for many people, when they make certain choices, they also want to defend their choice till death. It's not just about my choice, it also gets tied up with the rightness and wrongness of things, that I am making a choice and it is the right thing to do. So if I'm getting married, for many people, it becomes something that it becomes that ye sahi cheez hai, or ye, they don't. So to recognize that it is much more difficult for example, for me, I'm straight. I cannot close my eyes to the oppression or to the conditions and lived experiences of people who are not straight. And for me, therefore, at wherever and whatever avenue I can, however much I can, to promote, to speak for, to counteract, to counter the heteronormativity present in our structures is important. And so that making a choice, which is a privileged choice, which is pro, let's say, patriarchal choice, also, there is something there with me that I need to be an ally, and I need to provide support for those, and not just make my life about just a very selfish individuals going about their own, journeys in vacuum and isolation, I believe.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Rohitha?
Yeah. I think for me, it's the way around this dilemma is to decenter the question of choice itself. And then I would also be decentering myself and an individual in general from this whole issue, because there's two sides to this, right? So one is like the example that you brought up. If I make a choice to get married and that affects a cousin who doesn't want to get married, uh, it's not my fault that the cousin is affected by my choice. The fault lies with marriage as an institution and the structures that are compelling and coercing women into getting married. And so we're kind of pit against each other in this system. It's not that I am doing something to her detriment. We're just pit against each other. And so that's one part of it when I make an unfeminist choice per se. Uh, the other side of it is when I make maybe a feminist choice of kind of rebelling, going against the grain, like norms that are dictated for me as a woman. If we take the example of, say, I'm bringing this up because also Itisha had brought up questions about mental health. So when we look at mental health institutions, for example, the Supreme Court recently had flagged human rights violations in state mental health institutions, uh, housing women. So when we look at the women who reside in the mental health institutions there, a lot of them are there for deviance. And the deviance is kind of defined by not conforming to the norms that are ascribed to women. So maybe not performing domestic labor in the home, or refusing to ascribe to norms of purity when it comes to your sexuality or anything like that. Any kind of deviant behavior lands you in a situation where it's kind of almost incarceration. And that exercising of that choice leads to an overall lack of agency for the person. So it's like that is also something to consider, where the same choice affects two people very differently. So it doesn't mean that because I'm going against the grain and rebelling, it doesn't mean it's empowering or feminist, because the same choice leads to these outcomes for somebody else. So I think that's why I would just not center my choices in the conversation at all, and rather look at the systems that are pitting us against each other and that affect people differentially based on where they are in like their social positionality. Um, yeah, and I guess like in short, it's as feminists, it's not necessarily the case that everything we do should be a feminist act. And calling and trying to aspire to that again inevitably makes us lose sight of the bigger picture about like what are the goals as a whole, as opposed to what do I do that I get to call feminist and feel proud of personally. And that's not to undermine those actions at all, because they can be and are very empowering and make our quality of life better. But I think maybe it shouldn't be mistaken with a larger empowering kind of act that also affects somebody else.
Thank you for sharing that, Rohitha. Soumya?
Thank you, Ashia. I personally believe that we should all start by sort of forgiving ourselves, because it's inevitable that we are going to not live up to our own expectations of being a feminist. We will be married, and if it's a ritualistic marriage ceremony that wedding ceremony that we are going for, that is also one sort of structural hegemony that we are sort of adhering to. If you're planning to have children, it is in the larger debate of how sustainable is it to have children right now. That is also going to be a choice that will be held against us if we are planning to have children. Similarly, that's it goes on, right? So I believe it's important to understand that our feminism, uh, ideally, realistically, it's not going to be perfect. We are going to make mistakes. And to hold ourselves accountable is one way to go, to be conscious of the choice that we are making. If I am planning, or if I want to get married, and if I am getting married to a person of the same caste and same religion, it is important to understand, and it is important to acknowledge that I am making this choice by my own, right? But like Rohitha said, it is also, we shouldn't be losing sight of the larger picture. There are multiple structures that are, sort of leading up to this choice that we are making. There are structures that will not let a woman, for as simple as a single woman not being able to, rent a place, a flat properly, as opposed to maybe, a married woman, a married couple being able to rent a flat much more easily. So the structures around us are also such that for our survival also, it's easier, or the easier choice may not exactly seem very feminist, but I think we need to be a lot more empathetic towards ourselves, because it's going to be, I mean, imagine having to fight these battles all the time. It's going to be so exhausting. So it's I think it's good to go easy on ourselves every once in a while.
Thank you for sharing that, Soumya. I think we often forget that we live in an imperfect system, and then we try to be so perfect that there's guilt trips, there's lack of empathy towards ourselves and towards each other, which also leads to shaming each other for our choices. Yeah, it just if this was a feminist world that we lived in, we probably wouldn't be here. And if we live in a patriarchal world, and we are a part of this movement that's trying to build something differently, then how can it be perfect? It's a hit and trial. So yeah, that's something for us to remember. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Those were all my questions. I think I'll open the space now for any questions or any thoughts from the participants.